What's he doing?
Is to go even further beyond!
Hello everybody, Play-Doh here, and today we're going to be bringing a late game sorcery build guide for everybody that wants to be a mage and doesn't really want to rely on close range combat too much and just wants to fire away their skills. This is my personal preferred playstyle for this game because I suck. So to everybody that sucks just like me or that wants to try something different and wants to be a mage on the battlefield, well, let's go ahead and get started. First of all, we're going to go ahead and start with our weapon. Let's focus on our melee weapon first before we get to the staffs. So the melee weapon we're going to be primarily focusing on this build is going to be the Moonveil Katana. Now, this is going to be your personal preference. You can use any melee weapon that you find that you like using in this game. My personal preference is the Moonveil because it has a really nice charge heavy attack, which is great for staggers. It has a great light attack. These are its weapon arts, by the way, which is great for a AoE when you have enemies rushing at you. And the weapon is actually really fast when it comes to its normal attacks. So if you want those instances where you want to save mana and just want to use your normal attacks, or you get into a situation where you can't use your skills because there are a few bosses or a few enemies where it's better, and you'll figure this out the more you play, to just use your Moonveil on rather than wasting your FP on higher spells. It's really, really good value for what it does. Now, the heavy attack of the Moonveil Katana can actually stagger a lot of enemies within 1, 2, or 3 heavy attacks. And this is going to be really great, as we'll be going to be showcasing here really quickly, is because you can go up to enemies, literally 1 heavy attack, dodge roll back, 2nd heavy attack, dodge roll back a few times, maybe 1 more heavy attack, get them staggered, and then go in for that crit, and then just follow up, you know, with a few light attacks. And there you go. Bob's your uncle. The enemy is dead, right? This is going to be really nice for those situations where if we were just to use abilities on something like this, not only would it take a good amount of time, but it just takes a lot of your mana away as well, right? Where the Moonveil Katana is super, super good at that low FP usage, getting them to their crit, and then going ahead and taking them out with the crit damage. So we'll do this one more time here. Again, depending on the enemy, it's going to take 2 to 3, or sometimes even 1 heavy attack. And then, you know, maybe if they're on the ground, you can follow it up with a quick spell, and then, you know, Bob's your uncle. But we'll get into the spells and all of that in just a moment here. So that is why we really, really like the Moonveil Katana. So for our second weapon, we're actually just using a standard dagger, not upgraded or anything like that. And it's just a dagger that has Royal Knight's Resolve as an Ash of War. So to explain this, let's go and take a quick jump break to Hot-View Balcony. The reason we're here is because it's actually a really good place to test what I'm about to show you. So Royal Knight's Resolve, what it's going to do is it's going to increase your next attack by either, I believe, 80 to 100%. Now, this is very similar to its younger cousin Determination, which does the same thing, but for a 60% damage increase. I believe Determination's duration is 10 seconds, and then Royal Knight's Resolve's duration is 8 seconds. Now, what these are supposed to do is actually only increase your next attack by that amount, right? So for Royal Knight's Resolve, it would be increase your next attack by, I believe it's 80% damage. Someone can correct me in the comments. It's either 80 or 100%. I'm pretty sure it's 80. I'm going to say it's 80%. But it's currently bugged where it doesn't account for skills. So for that entire 8-second duration, you will actually get that bonus for your skills as long as you don't attack with the weapon itself, which we won't be doing in this scenario, right? This is really great for, you know, just popping really quickly and maybe using one of your lower FP skills and just spamming and one-shotting enemies. And then, you know, once the duration runs out, go ahead and pop it again. It's such a low FP cost of 15 that you're really not going to notice it once you have a good amount into mind, or even early game. You're really not going to notice the FP cost for the amount of damage you get. Now, don't go and trying to do this all the time because there are going to be situations where it's just not viable. But for those times that it is viable, it is actually insane in the amount of damage it's going to do. So for example here, let's go and take a look at this bird. If we just use one Ranni's Dark Mood without using Royal Knight's Resolve, let's see the amount of damage we do. And then we can come back to it really quickly and see the amount of damage we do with Royal Knight's Resolve. So 2,476 is the damage we dealt to that bird. Now, if we go ahead and go back here and do the exact same thing, but this time pop Royal Knight's Resolve, before we go ahead and fly Ranni's Dark Moon, the damage is actually quite insane to what you get here. 3,882. Now, one thing that I don't see a lot of videos mention about Determination, Royal Knight's Resolve in this specific manner, or probably many Ashes of War, is, and this is really cool here, right? You can actually fire your skill, and then while the skill is in midair, pop it, and it'll apply to the skill that's already in midair. Now, you can actually use that kind of cheesily. For instance, let's say there's like an enemy that you want to do this on, but you want to take full advantage of like that 8-second duration. You can go ahead and fire your ability, do it midair, and get that little bit of 1 or 2 extra seconds to go ahead and pummel them with some extra abilities during that time, right? I think that's really, really cool. If you want to really min-max that extra 1 to 2 seconds and pop it while the skill is flying, I would recommend, but you know, you really don't need to. It's really not that much of a game-changing mechanic, but something really nice to know if you didn't know. Before we go ahead and focus on what staff we're going to be primarily using for this build, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Bloodhound Step. Now, this Bloodhound Step you can get as a weapon art as well and just apply it to a dagger. And the reason we're using daggers is they're very light on equipment load. Therefore, we can stay at medium equipment load and really not have to worry. But as you can see here on the screen, Bloodhound Step is super good for iframes. It's the best dodge in the game. So if you are struggling against enemies as a mage, and you're finding that regular dodge rolling is just not up to par, pop a Bloodhound Step dagger, you know, just spam your abilities, pop a Bloodhound Step, get the fuck out of dodge, spam more abilities, you know, pop your Bloodhound Step, and just rinse and repeat, and you'll be hard-pressed to find an enemy unless, you know, they have some crazy fucking auto-aim lock-on bullshit combo, which a few enemies do. You'll be out of most situations in no time. And it looks fucking cool. Moving on from our melee weapons, let's go ahead and focus on the staff we're going to be using, and that is going to be the Carian Regal Scepter. It has no downsides, it has damn good sorcery scaling, and it is the best all-arounder staff, and in my opinion, the best staff in this game, while also boosting full moon sorcery, which we will be using in this build, and it just complements this build so much better. Now, if you're in the early game, the Meteorite staff is going to be your bread and butter. Again, like I mentioned earlier, links down in the description below of all of this that I'm going to be mentioning in this video. The Meteorite staff, again, is going to be your bread and butter because it boosts gravity sorcery for a rock sling as well in the early to mid game, and I would not recommend going away from this staff until you have the Carian Regal Scepter upgraded to the point where the sorcery scaling passes the Meteorite staff. To get the Carian Regal Scepter, I'll just mention it really quickly. You just beat Rennala, use a Remembrance, boom, get the Scepter, and if you want the Full Moon spell as well, you can dupe a Remembrance at the Mausoleum and do both and get the Full Moon spell as well. That's what I personally did. Now, why aren't we using Lusats and why aren't we using Azurs? Well, Azurs, you get reduced cast time for all sorceries, but it consumes additional FP, and the cast time that's reduced is very, very minimal with Azurs, and we'll see that we're going to be using a talisman that does this, but 10 times better. Lusats, a really great staff, however, I do not like the fact that it consumes a shit ton of FP for a damage bonus. Now, you can minimize this by using our physics potion we'll get to in just a little bit, so where you don't consume additional FP and you get that little bit of an FP bonus as well. Sorry, magic damage bonus for your sorceries. But I find that the extra damage that this provides isn't even worth it to use it with that combo because the Carian Regal Scepter will still be able to do your Kamehameha cheese and your Meteorite of Estelle cheese, or just, you know, your flurry of Ranni's Dark Moon spam, which actually is so much better on the Carian Regal Scepter than the damage bonus Lusats provide. This is just for Ranni's Dark Moon, because the damage you get from Ranni's Dark Moon with Carian Regal Scepter surpasses that of Lusats without any of the additional FP cost. So that is why I personally prefer the Carian Regal Scepter. Great all-arounder, no downsides, and you're just going to be flying. And it looks fucking sick too, in my opinion. Alright, let's go ahead and move on to our gear. And the only piece of gear that really matters is going to be the Snow Witch hat that Ranni provides after the end of her quest line. So why are we using the Snow Witch hat? Well, if you read the description, it says that it strengthens cold sorcery. And that is going to be our bread and butter in this build, is our cold sorcery. And it increases our cold sorcery damage by 10%. And if you didn't know, cold sorcery also applies frostbite. So the skills that we're going to be using, which is the Glinstone Icecrag, the Adula's Moonblade, and the Ranni's Dark Moon will all be applying Frostbite, which gives an additional 20% damage on enemies that are frostbitten. So a total of 30% damage can be applied, which is really amazing. As far as your armor, your gloves, and your boots goes, you can do whatever you want. However, I actually highly recommend the Snow Witch robe. It is a very lightweight ornament that actually has really good damage negation and resistances. You can put on whatever you really want to fit your style here, but I do recommend the Snow Witch hat as a must, and I would also recommend the Snow Witch robe for that light equipment load and good defenses. And as far as your gloves and boots goes, pick whatever is going to be the strongest you have here, while still keeping you at a medium equipment load. Currently, I have the Lionel's gauntlets and the boots because they're the best that I've found in my progression of the story. And it also gives us a decent poise, which is about 33, which will help us, getting a little bit unstaggered or not getting staggered. So 33 poise is nothing to scoff at with this build, since we are pretty much glass cannon, and it actually does help in certain scenarios. But again, the gloves and boots is completely your call. Just use whatever you have right now that is your current best in terms of damage negation, resistance, while still keeping you at that medium equipment load. Moving along, let's go ahead and focus on our talismans. The talismans we're going to be using is Radagon's Icon, Stargazer's Heirloom, Graven Mass Talisman, and Graven School Talisman. Now, Graven School Talisman will provide us with a 4% damage bonus to all of our sorceries. Graven Mass does the same thing, but at 8%. Stargazer's Heirloom gives us +5 on our intelligence points, which is actually low-key really nice. We can go ahead and allocate those +5 points elsewhere. And then Radagon Icon shortens our spell casting time. Quick note that I wanted to mention is that Stargazer's Heirloom will provide more damage every single time than Graven School's Talisman. However, Graven Mass Talisman provides a bit more damage than Stargazer's Heirloom from the testing that I have done. If there's any flex talisman in this build, it is going to be Graven School Talisman. And Graven School Talisman, you can go ahead and replace it with any other talisman you want to use. Maybe it's an Erdtree's Favor 1, Erdtree's Favor 2, or just a regular Erdtree's Favor, which I have here, which raises your maximum HP, stamina, and equip load. But I'll go ahead and leave this up to you. One talisman that I did want to shout out quickly is the Magic Scorpion Charm, which I will have to get at New Game Plus. Basically, this will increase our magic attack power by 12%, while giving us a penalty similar to Radagon's Sword Seal, where we also take increase in damage. I haven't been able to test that talisman out because, I didn't do that specific quest in the specific way to get it, so I'll go ahead and have to test that in New Game Plus. One thing I did want to mention about Radagon's Icon is that I think it is required in any sorcery build, because with Radagon's Icon, we are casting our spells at a decently fast rate without actually investing any points into dexterity, except for what we need to equip with Moonveil and adding an extra 2 to reach that 20 breakpoint, and I'll explain that in just a minute here. Now, if we don't use Radagon's Icon, you can see that our spell casting time is actually pretty slow. Now, you're not going to notice the spell casting time be that prevalent in a lot of spells that we use, because some of the spells we use do have a lot of casting time. So, for example, Adula's Moonblade. Now, if we were to use that without Radagon's Icon, you will notice it actually being a little bit slower, but maybe not as, noticeable as the Glinstone Icecrag. However, my personal opinion is I can definitely notice it with Adula's Moonblade. And it's actually really clutch to use it with Adula's Moonblade as well, because you can get that, basically the 1-2, really fast before those enemies can actually get at you. Maybe some of our other spells like Ranni's Dark Moon is where you're going to be not noticing it as much because it has such a long animation time as well. So, maybe for some of those abilities you won't notice Radagon's Icon too much. But for the 2 daily drivers we're going to be using in Glinstone Icecrag and Adula's Moonblade, we'll get to this in just a little bit later, it's going to be really nice. Now let's go ahead and talk about our stats and how we've allocated this in our late game build. So we are level 152, and the primary stat that we focused on is, of course, intelligence. And the reason we have it at 80 is 80 is actually the soft cap for intelligence, and after 80 you start seeing a lot less returns. Technically, I guess around 60 is when you start seeing fewer returns, but around 80 is when you start really seeing those small returns. I'll have links in the description below for those soft caps if you're interested. Now, aside from intelligence, you want to focus on vigor and mind as your secondary primary stats. What I do recommend is having 12 strength and 18 dexterity to equip your Moonveil, but I do recommend increasing your dexterity to at least 20, because dexterity scales really well in 10 increments for our weapon casting, for our skill casting times. So with Dexterity at 20 and using Radakan's Icon is the best bang for buck for a cast time until we have additional points we can dump into Dexterity once we've finished off with Vigor and Mind. So start with Intelligence and then focus on Vigor and Mind. I don't mean just put straight up points into Intelligence, kind of allocate it as you go, right? You don't want like 70 points into Intelligence and then nothing in Vigor and Mind. You want to allocate it to where you're going to be surviving a few boss hits and having enough mana for your abilities as well. But you're basically going to be prioritizing Intelligence, Vigor, Mind. It doesn't have to be Vigor, Mind in that order. You can do Mind and Vigor depending on your playstyle. And then, you know, enough Strength and Dexterity for your Moonveil. Make sure you get Dexterity at least 20 to hit that breakpoint with Radakan's Icon. And then you can dump anything else into maybe Endurance. I didn't really heavily focus on Endurance too much on the early and mid game. I only started pumping a bit more into Endurance as I started getting into enemies that required me to spam a bit more skills. The increased Endurance means increased stamina, which means we are able to spam a bit more skills, but mainly for equipment load is why I leveled up my Endurance, so I could wear better gloves and boots and still be in that medium equipment load. All right, the moment you've been waiting for. What are the spells we're using? Well, if you paid attention and you saw it on the bottom left, you probably already know by now when I was going over the rest of the build overview, but it is going to be Terra Magicus, Glinstone Icecrag, Adula's Moonblade, Ranni's Dark Moon, Sling, Loretta's Greatbow, and Comet Azur. Now, Comet Azur, Greatbow, Sling, and Terra Magicus, you can use whatever other spell you want to fit your playstyle. The three main that we want is Ranni's Dark Moon, Adula's Moonblade, and Glinstone Icecrag, because they synergize with our Snow Witch top for that 10% increased damage for cold, as well as applying Frostbite as well. One thing you want to know about Ranni's Dark Moon is that it actually reduces a target's magic negation by 30%. So this does not mean, and it also lasts for 1 minute. So this does not mean that enemies will take 30% more damage, right? The amount of damage that you will do is increased to the target with that debuff is based on how much magic negation they have. So it is actually a really great opener on most boss fights, unless you just want to Kamehameha them, right? If you're able to do that. So really good opener on boss fights, really good opener on tankier enemies. The only detriment is it costs 62 FP, but honestly, it is so worth it. Highly recommend these three skills if you're going this build. Now, some other skills you may want to use with this build are going to be Night Maiden's Mist. Really great, really good AoE as well if you charge the ability. However, the only downside is enemies will tend to run out of this mist. Although it has great tick damage, enemies will just 9 times out of 10 just run out of it and WQ. I guess it's going to be really good for certain situations, for certain boss fights that don't move as much, but at that point, just Kamehameha them or do Meteorite of Estelle, which is also a great replacement for Comet Azur if you want to use this on certain enemies that Comet Azur might not be good at with your Kamehameha Infinite FP, which we'll get into in just a moment how to do all of that as well. Some other mentions is, you know, your good old Glintstone Pebble. Glinstone Stars is low-key kind of nice too with the low FP cost. It just follows enemies around. So if you have enemies that tend to just get the fuck out of the way, you can go ahead and pop this as well. Glinstone Arc is really good for AoE as well, but I just prefer our Moonblade light attack with its Ash of War that does a horizontal slash rather than using Glinstone Arc. But, you know, you may find this useful for your build as well. Stars of Ruin is actually the upgraded version or the legendary version of Glinstone Stars if you want to use that as well. The FP cost is a little bit high. This is actually a pretty decent skill for PvP. I'm not going to get into PvP in this video, but really nice to use as well. If you happen to unlock Carian Phalanx as well, this is kind of a good defensive ability if you want to go like into melee fights with the Moonblade. Just pop this, you know, fight a melee enemy that likes to WQ. It'll actually stagger the enemy, so you can get in a easy Moonveil heavy attack and maybe it'll stagger them enough to crit. Really good. You can really honestly mess around with anything. You know, good old Carian Slicer is here. Carian Greatstore I would not recommend at all since we have Adula's Moonblade. Anyways, I haven't unlocked all the spells myself or the incantations, which we're not going to get into since it's not a faith build, but you can really just mix and match anything for those 4 slots that I mentioned. Basically Terra Magicus, Sling, Greatbow, or Comet Azur. You can go ahead and replace with any other spell that you want to your heart's content. But with that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at our Wondrous Physick. Now this is where our Kamehameha combo with the Comet Azur and the Meteorite of Estelle, where we can just spam an ability and just watch a boss melt comes in. So to do this, you first need to get your Wondrous Physick, and then you need to mix in the Cerulean Hidden Tear and the Magic-Shrouding Cracked Tear. Cerulean Hidden Tear basically will eliminate all mana, aka FP, focus power consumption, for 10 seconds. While I believe the Magic-Shrouding Cracked Tear increases our damage for about a minute. If this is incorrect, somebody just correct me in the comments. I didn't do my testing. It just felt like it lasted a minute to me when I was using this. Maybe it's longer than a minute. I don't know. It's for a good enough time. But basically, we want to be using both of these so we get increased amount of damage, and for the fact that all of our FP will not be consumed during this time. And I'll show you some clips after we go over our spell overview in just a moment on how you're going to put all of this together with some fancy clips as well. So that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at Terra Magicus. This provides a sigil on the ground, where it gives us a 30% bonus to our spells. Now, you don't have to be directly in the sigil. You can actually stand a little bit outside of the sigil. However, it's, you know, it's such a small area outside of the sigil. I would recommend just like being in the sigil just to make sure you're getting the damage bonus when you're trying to do your nuke combo. And what is that nuke combo? Well, the nuke combo would be doing Terra Magicus on the ground, and then switching to something like Comet Azur, popping your Wondrous Physick, and then as you can see, you can just blast your Comet Azur for days, right? Well, not for days, but for that 10 seconds, and then if it runs out of that 10 seconds, whatever mana you have left in your bar. Really great, and just will nuke bosses as long as they're able to stay within this range. Now, one thing I want to mention with this combo as well, you can actually incorporate it a few other ways. So let's go ahead and talk about a few other ways we can incorporate this combo. That's going to be your most basic one, starting with Terra Magicus, and then just popping the physics and going straight into your Comet Azur. Now, if you want to be fancy, you can go ahead and pop Terra Magicus, then use Ranni's Dark Moon for that magic debuff, then go ahead and use your physics, right? And then go ahead and blast Comet Azur. And then, you know, you're going to be doing the same thing, blah, blah, blah. Well, if you want to take it one step further, during that combo, you can actually pop Knight's Resolve and then blast with your Comet Azur as well if you want that additional damage. So if you want to see how that looks like with Knight's Resolve, I don't really recommend using Knight's Resolve in this way unless you know you can get away with it, because it does take a lot of time to do, and at that point your physics might, you know, it might be detrimental to your physics. But the recommendation I have if you want to use a Knight's Resolve combo would be Terra Magicus. If you want to do the full combo, Ranni's Dark Moon, right? Before you drink your physics, go ahead and pop this and then drink your physics, because in my opinion, it's more important to have the full 10 seconds of Comet Azur rather than the 8 seconds of Knight's Resolve when you're focusing with this combo. And you can do the exact same thing with Meteorite of Estelle. So if we were to use Meteorite of Estelle instead of Comet Azur, it'd look the same way, right? If you want to open up with this, go to Meteorite of Estelle, make sure you pop your physics, and then you can go ahead and just put your staff on the ground and watch as Armageddon rains upon, well, whatever enemy that happens to get into this Armageddon. Really only good for stationary bosses, though, I'm going to be honest with you. If you try doing this combo on bosses that just come at you, you're going to be in for a bad time. All right, so let's go and take a look at some of our other spells now. We've showcased this a little bit earlier while we were going through the rest of the build guide, but Glinstone Icecrag, great daily driver, and provides a good amount of damage depending on the enemy type you're facing. Remember, it all depends on their magic resistance that they have, right? Depending how much damage you're going to be doing. But Glinstone Icecrag, great daily driver, great low FP usage. If you want to take it a step further and do even more damage with this ability, you can actually pop Royal Knight's Resolve and then just blast away for that 8 seconds. Royal Knight's Resolve only costs 15 FP, providing us with that insane damage bonus where we can pretty much one-shot all trash mobs. Is really good value. But do keep in mind of your FP when you do that, though, however. Don't get too carried away with it. You know, just remember you have your Moonveil available that you can just go ahead and just blast enemies with melee, the heavy attack, and the light attack as well. Moving on to Adula's Moonblade. You can do the same thing with Adula's Moonblade like you did with your Glinstone Icecrag. You know, pop your Royal Knight's Resolve and just start seeing the immense amount of damage you can do with this. Great AoE, great to apply Frostbite, gets that 10% bonus just like Icecrag because of our Ranni's Witch Hat, and ultimately really, really, really good if you want to pair it with Moonveil. Like, honestly, pairing this with Moonveil makes you a melee character in no time. You know, you can go in with your Moonveil slashes, right? Like we showcased earlier in that beginning part of the video. We can go ahead and then do that crit after they get staggered, then follow it up with a Moonblade. All right, moving on from our Moonblade, we have Ranni's Dark Moon. Now, we showcased this earlier but let's go ahead and showcase it again. Great opener for bosses again, remember, with that debuff it applies. And it has decent range, and it tracks enemies as well. So pretty much like a better Rock Sling, in a sense that if you want to open up and do decent burst damage, it'll do it for you. The only downside it has over Rock Sling is Rock Sling has higher range, and Rock Sling has lesser mana cost as well. So Rock Sling's range is actually kind of crazy. The only downside of Rock Sling is going to be the fact that certain terrain like trees, boulders, or, you know, walls, grass, leaves, whatever, will make it so that anything caught in the Rock Sling that hits a tree or something will not go ahead and auto-target to the target. It'll just kind of hit that tree and kind of just stop there. But honestly, really great tool to use for that low FP cost because it tracks enemy as well. So I always like tried into Rock Sling. I've never strayed away from it. Although I don't use it as much sometimes, it has its niche purposes. Now, Loretta's Greatbow has the farthest range I believe we have of any ability that we're using. And it's actually really great for openers as well. It's not going to do as much damage as some of our other abilities, but if you go ahead and combo it with something like Terra Magicus, right? And then switch to your Royal Knight's Resolve, and then you blast a fully charged crossbow at range, it's going to go ahead and pretty much take out any enemy you want it to. The damage is actually quite insane. Now, you can actually do the same thing with Ranni's Dark Moon as well, and I actually like to do a lot of openers with Ranni's Dark Moon in the same manner. So let's go ahead and target an enemy, drop our Terra Magicus, right? Drop our Royal Knight's Resolve, and then open up with the Ranni's Dark Moon, and the damage is actually quite insane. If you want to take it one step further, you can actually pop your Physics Potion, but I only recommend doing that if you want to do like the Kamehameha and all of that. So there's a lot of variety you can do with this build, and a lot of variety and play styles that you will figure out depending on what kind of player you are. That's where I'm going to leave you guys off with this build guide. Hope you guys enjoyed it and learned a few things here from me. If I missed anything or if I said anything incorrectly, please correct me in the comments down below. And I'm going to leave you with a few simple montages that won't last too long on how I've done some of the combo setups I've done to help you out in your Elden Ring journey. That's it. Thank you so much. This is Play-Doh Bear. Love you guys. Catch me at my Twitch, twitch.tv/PlayDohBear. And until the next one, peace out.